spoilers for the 4.2 Archon Quest, and only this Archon Quest. I can't believe it! They really did it! They saved Fontaine! Paimon's idea of digging tunnels to drain Fontaine of all the water really worked! I'm obviously kidding. So Focalors came up with an elaborate scheme to deceive the heavenly principles and give Neuvillette his authority back. And there's a lot about fate and the prophecy I want to talk about. As a disclaimer in this video, I won't be talking about the 4.2 World Quests or even some other major parts of the new Archon Quest. Yes, there's important information everywhere, and it surely all fits together, but there's a lot of it, and alas, I have but a single brain cell, so I'd rather break down smaller, digestible pieces. Let's start with some background. Long ago, the original Dragon Sovereign of Hydro had dominion over the Primordial Sea, where all life came from. The Usurper, or the Heavenly Principles, arrived and charged its envoy with suppressing the Sovereign and creating its own vision for life. It made a new heart out of the Primordial Sea, which would be Egeria, and down the line, she would be gifted a shard of authority. She would sense in her Oceanid familiars that they longed to be human, so using primordial water, she gave them human form. They would be the people of Fontaine. The primordial waters themselves break the bonds that give them shape, and this is why Fontainians can dissolve. But the heavenly principles did not give her permission to create her own life, and this was her sin. This original sin would be shouldered by all Fontainians. So, the prophecy states that the waters will rise and dissolve Fontainians, leaving the Hydro Archon alone, weeping at her throne. Only then will this original sin be washed away. The creature at the heart of this impending catastrophe is the all-devouring narwhale. It hungers for the primordial waters and is the reason for the rising primordial sea level. So Egeria went off and died in the Sumeru Desert, leaving Focalors, her Oceanid familiar who she also gave human form, to clean up this huge mess. Focalors was stumped because, as the Mage N, or Nicole, has said many times, the fate of Teyvat is particularly difficult to change. But to us, she mentions that prophecies are the future seen from a god's perspective, and perhaps there's things outside the god's gaze. I mean, she's basically suggesting there are loopholes. And as a side note, she also uses the exact same wording that Dainsleif uses in Travails. Suspicious. Confronted with this daunting task of subverting the prophecy, Focalors split herself into divine and human parts. The divinity she placed into the Oratrice with the Gnosis, and the human form, Furina, was cursed to play the role of the Archon for centuries. No idea why, cursed with immortality, always role-playing, forever acting, just to deceive the heavenly principles. She had to make it look like the prophecy was playing out, for if the facade were to be broken, Fontaine would be doomed and make an enemy of the divine. That's a lot of pressure for one person. In the Oratrice Mécanique d'Analyse Cardinale, Focalors has been aggregating indemnitium, which is a form of energy harvested from people's belief in justice. This power would be used for the execution of the Hydro Archon, or more technically, the destruction of the throne of the Hydro Archon herself. Anyway, by doing this, she can relinquish all authority back to its rightful owner, the new Dragon Sovereign of Hydro, Neuvillette. Now, they also make it clear that the Gnosis itself isn't the authority. More on thrones and Gnosis in another video, though. So, Neuvillette gains his authority back and obtains his full dragonhood. This gives him full control of the primordial waters, and now he's able to do a few important things. Like he's able to separate the primordial waters from the all-devouring narwhale, and nerf it a bit so we can beat it. But more importantly, see, Neuvillette was invited to be the Eudex with an underlying motive. By allowing him to live with humans, he may come to love humanity. So when this inevitable day arrived, he could choose to save the people. So, with his regained full authority, he is able to use his power to make Fontainians truly fully human, giving them real blood as the original sovereign might have. And with that, the prophecy played out with Fontaine flooding, but without people dissolving since they've basically been baptized with Neuvillette's dragon juice. Gosh, I wish that were me. But anyway, everyone's saved! So we're left with a lot of outstanding questions about the nature of fate and what it is, and how exactly it works, especially with regard to constellations and stars and the heavenly principles. And there's also the question about the whale. And sorry to disappoint, I currently do not have a grand presentable plan for how all this works together. However, I really want to explore exactly how Focalors deceived the heavenly principles, because I do think the way she did that can inform us about the nature of fate. As a disclaimer, this next part has a lot of my personal interpretation, so other perspectives might answer the same questions just as well, if not better, so keep that in mind. Paimon had asked Nicole if the prophecy, or as she called it, the history of the future, could be stopped. Nicole is like, Lamau, you've already seen a failed attempt changing history. She's referring to Scaramouche's erasure from Irminsul. Memories changed, written records changed, but the people Scaramouche wanted to save still died or suffered. He could not change fate. As Nicole said, fate is like a tree that can be swayed but not displaced. A vase can fall to the ground, and it doesn't matter if done by a cat or a bird. The vase will always be broken. Scaramouche was dealing with past history, but now we're also dealing with history, just one of the future. Now, we see the apparent futility of present actions against fate when we cook up the most convoluted plan to put Furina on trial to ascertain her secrets. But we learn the trial was all part of the prophecy. We didn't change anything, we played right into it. And we literally also witnessed the foretold flood with Furina weeping at her throne all alone. So keeping with this comparison here, while Scaramouche made significant changes to written history, he could not save the people he wanted to. Yet Focalors did the opposite. The prophecy, or the history of the future, played out exactly as expected, but she saved everyone. A new voice line by Nahida provides insight into why this is the case. She says that wisdom is not about what you know, but knowing what you can change. And Focalors recognized this. Again, think about what Nicole said about the vase. Whether broken by a cat or bird, the result is the same, a broken vase. But think of it this way, what if it is consequential in some other way that it was a cat or a bird? Let me apply this to the prophecy. The entire point is that the original sin of all Fontainians will be washed away. It's the response to Egeria's sin. This would have happened via the rising primordial sea, instigated by the whale. But by Focalors giving Neuvillette his authority back, Neuvillette was able to forgive Fontainians of sin and turn them into true humans. The original sin goes away in either case. So, to put it in Nicole speak, whether washed by a whale or dragon, the result is still the washing of sin. So here, the method matters. Now, just as a quick clarification, it may be confusing to some as to why dissolving seems to be an important part of the prophecy, but it's the one thing that doesn't happen. But consider the stone slates. They show the truth, the confession, the trial, and the throne, but nothing really about dissolution. So my take has been that it wasn't really a requirement of the prophecy. It wasn't that people must dissolve, it's just that they can dissolve, and they certainly would have dissolved given the certainty of the other events. So anyway, I think this is all what Nicole was talking about with prophecies being the future from a god's perspective. Perhaps they only really see the major plot points they decide to become true. Perhaps they can only see the broken vase. So Focalors had accepted that certain things must happen, and while Furina put on a show, Focalors could implement a plan behind the scenes that inserts some minor changes into the script of fate. Speaking of scripts of fate, we did get some foreshadowing about this quite a few patches ago. Remember the intaglio you received during a certain hangout? Yes, I'm making this about Kaeya, aka the man who coined all the world's a stage. At the end of one path, he says that perhaps fate is like a script written by an inept god. He also says that actors should feel free to improvise a little bit. In fact, prior to this conversation, he's acting in a play and he improvises. This improv does not ultimately affect the play's overall story or the outcome, but it did two things. It very subtly but distinctly changed the characterization of the main character, Prince Kubad, and now we also have the intaglio, which we wouldn't have if he didn't improvise. Now, this is a very allegorical, toned-down metaphor for knowing what you can change. But imagine if this were a major Archon Quest and that Intaglio turned out to be the key to Conria. Just an example. It may be a stretch, but I digress. Now, there are a few other aspects of the prophecy I find very interesting, but this next part has a lot more random speculation. When you talk to Mona about the prophecy, she says that scrying the fate of the world cannot be done by an astrologist even as talented as she is. It'd have to be by a visionary. Paimon says, "Wow, this visionary who foretold this prophecy must be super powerful." Later, Skirk happens to mention the visionary Veðrfolnir, and Paimon does a double take asking who that is. I don't think this is a coincidence, and I wonder if Veðrfolnir is the person who foretold this prophecy. Honestly, it's impossible to tell at this point, but it would also make him super old, so I don't know. But would you be intrigued to hear that I talked about Veðrfolnir in a video from nearly a year ago? Let me explain. In Norse mythology, Veðrfolnir is a hawk that sits between the eyes of an eagle that sits atop Yggdrasil. So it's a bird that sits atop the world tree. There's also another bird, Veðrfolnir, who is described almost identically. The interesting thing about Veðrfolnir is that it can only be slain by a sword called Levitain. In Genshin, this sword is mentioned in a book called Legend of the Shattered Halberd. I have talked about this book and its author a lot. Levitain is the most cursed of the swords that was forged from the fragments of the titular Shattered Halberd. So I'm mentioning all of this because I've previously asserted that Shattered Halberd is holding some secrets of the world, and also in the book, Levitain is specifically a cursed sword that previously burned the entire world to cinders. And in the book, it's suggested it'll do it again. So thematically, this fits in this overarching theme of prophecies of the end of the world, and also them repeating. Which is made more interesting if this world-ending sword has a connection to a visionary who is handing out end-time prophecies. And speaking of prophecies of catastrophe, do y'all remember like 3 years ago or so when they released Dainsleif's introduction card? It reads as a history of things that have happened, or perhaps it's a prophecy, a history of the future. If so, it describes events so grand that only a visionary would be able to tell it. So maybe Barbeloth or Nicole, for example. Although personally, I've more recently thought that it could be the Sinner, given that Dane seems familiar with the Sinner. But now we have another name to consider. And think of it this way. Both Veðrfolnir and Dane are names from Norse mythology, and they both might have connections with Irminsul. But regardless of whatever visionary or even a higher power that wrote this, there's one line I want to mention. It's translated to, "The future must atone for bygone mistakes." But in the original Chinese, it seems to say something closer to, "The future saves the past." I'd like to propose an interpretation through the lens of what we witnessed in Fontaine, and also the importance of prophecies and knowing fate. Consider Focalors. She was able to save Fontaine in the end because she knew the prophecy. She knew of the endpoint and the things that could and couldn't be changed. She knew what the gods would see and what they wouldn't. So here, knowing the history of the future saves the past. And this, in my opinion, could be a way you might actually subvert or change fate, without help from higher powers, of course. Like I said, this was a relatively focused video on a very specific topic, and there's plenty more I'd love to say about the future saving the past, or suspicious things that Dane says. And obviously, there's an aspect about samsaras that I want to touch on eventually, but I need to process more. And I didn't even touch on the whale, or skirk, or Sirtology, or the world formula, Mr. Nye, Gnosis, Descenders, Authorities, but we have time. We'll get to it. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe. No, seriously, in the comment section, feel free to share your own theories. I love hearing different perspectives and insights into what's going on. And make sure to check that your smoke detector batteries are working. Alright, that's all for now. Bye!